Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Nordic Sound. As always, I am your host, Jameson Foster, and today I am joined by actually a favorite duo of mine ever since I stumbled upon their EP, Stuffed Pockets. This is the duo Ville and Tommie. They are known for an eclectic approach to folk music, combining the accordion and the fiddle. And I guess without me rambling on with a further introduction, I would love to have you guys introduce yourselves. Villa, would you like to say hi first so people can put a voice to a name?
Yeah, I'm Ville. I'm a Swedish Finnish fiddler, and I reside in Malmö, but my roots are from Finland. So the Swedish Finnish is like a minority thing in Sweden
Hmm.
as well.
All right,
Uh,
cool. Yeah, and we can get into that, especially when we start talking about the I guess culture around both Finnish and Swedish folk music when we get to there. And so, Tommy, would you like to go next? If I understand correctly, you're a bit of a curveball because you are Cornish, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah. So, would you like to say a little bit more about where you come from, who you are?
Sure. So I'm Tommy Blackloff, originally from Penzance, or thereabouts, end of Cornwall. The furthest place you can probably get to in Western Europe from Finland. And Yeah, I have been living in Finland for 6 years now. So at some point, when I was in my 20s, I fell in love with first Swedish fiddle playing. And then one thing led to another, and I ended up pursuing a master's here in Finland and staying.
Hmm.
So this is my life now.
Oh, and what a great life it seems, at least from a distance.
Yeah.
And I guess something I want to ask you about, Tommy, before we get carried away with the music. Did I read that you had a short stint as an ethnomusicologist?
Indeed, I did. Yes.
I don't know if you know, but I am an ethnomusicologist. So when I read that, I had a good chuckle. Especially the wording on your website is a brief stint. Do you just want to say a little bit about your experience or about that brief stint?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a bit of it feels like a bit of an impossibility, doesn't it? A brief stint as an ethnomusicologist. I think once an ethnomusicologist, always an ethnomusicologist.
Yep.
I did my bachelor's in music at a university called SOAS, which is the School of Oriental and African Studies
Hmm.
in London. And I thought I was going to study music when I applied. And it turns out I actually went to study this little known, incredibly niche thing called ethnomusicology. So I basically have a bachelor's in ethnomusicology,
Cool.
which has been useful. I can't disagree. Yeah. And although I went back to being a musician thereafter,
Hmm.
hence the brief stint, I absolutely still put that hat on every now and then.
Awesome. I actually I sort of live by the idea that everyone is an ethnomusicologist if they listen to enough music and they talk about music. So for some people it's a job title, for other people it's just a way of going through life. So yeah,
Exactly.
I'm so glad I asked you about that, especially because you bring up that important. Sometimes there's a little too much of a hard line between ethnomusicologist and musician, but that would be like a whole other conversation.
Yeah,
Yes. So
exactly.
yeah, so I guess getting back to the music of Villa and Tommy, what I found that people are always interested in, what always starts a really cool conversation is when we bring up the music that you guys grew up with, and maybe how that comes back around in the music that you make now. So Villa, I guess I would ask you first. What sort of music did you grow up with, and I guess what was your sort of first experience as a musician?
yeah, I've like grown up on festivals and floors of rehearsing dance companies and things like that. Uh, so my mom and dad met in this folk dance group, and my dad's been playing music there. My mom's been dancing there, and then we got the rest of the family, you know, cousins to dad and second cousins, and like everybody in my mom and dad's generation, they danced and the kids played. So yeah, we're quite a few who play like our music back from home.
Mm-hmm.
But like listening on my own, I would say like one of my first like proper like listening experiences was listening to Mullarit, which is like Karelian, Russian Karelian Finnish band, and I think that a lot of my like aesthetics comes from from that. But it's still but yeah, that was the start of it all, like just being in it, and like I couldn't and cannot see how life would look without music and being around it and being around people dancing. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you grew up like completely immersed in a folk dance tradition.
Yeah, so you can say that, but you know, when growing up, you don't partake in the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you don't take stuff from school with you and do it with adults. So it was like this, just being in it, which made it like make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like a god, like who's dancing angrily. Like it was like, that's the one who's acting like they're angry. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's the like person who's fallen in love, and like, you know, all the aesthetics of folk dance, especially when you got this kind of group element to it, because it was a lot of like patterns going about back and forth. So yeah, and a lot of different dance styles.
Awesome. Yeah. And at what point did you join in the music? Did you first pick up a fiddle and join, or was there some other gateway drug that you had? Yeah, just trying to figure out at what point that you actually joined the music making part of it.
Yeah, I was like, I started playing fiddle when I was 7, and then I stopped when I was 12, and then I joined in on a like folk dance trip on a boat called Folklandia, which is kick-ass. Everybody should go.
I just love the name.
yeah, it's
a crazy idea.
Yeah.
It's the middle of winter, stick the entire folk music scene of Finland on a boat and send them across the sea for one night.
Yeah.
This is the most amazing thing I've ever heard. It is, yeah, sounds like a great idea. You know, they do the same thing with metalheads with the 70,000 tons of metal, but that's in the summer, isn't it? Or unless I'm misremembering. So, but it's very Finnish. Do it in the winter. Throw everyone on a boat in the winter. I love it.
Yeah, it's grand, and I'm still remembering the, like, you know, the feeling of just getting carried away within music, and I like understood what the thing was with the scene and the culture and all the things around it. So I've since then I've tried my best, and I started playing fiddle again, and I've done my best to be a part of it and share that feeling to others.
Awesome. Yeah. And we can definitely get into, you know, that question of, you know, what does it mean to be a folk musician to you, and that sort of stuff later, especially when we were talking about the EP, the album that you guys did. So I want to move over to Tommie, especially because, Tommie, you bring up that geographically speaking, in Western Europe, you're kind of as far as you can get from Sweden. So I'm very curious how you got into the whole Scandinavian fiddling scene in particular. But first off, what sort of music did you grow up with? And what was also, like, Ville, what was your earliest memory as a musician?
Yeah. I think my earliest like musical memories are all family. So I was very lucky to grow up in a musical environment. My mum plays fiddle and had a Cajun band.
Oh, yeah.
Things. That's another story. And then my grandparents had essentially a ceilidh band, a barn dance band. And and then other members of the family were into other things like bluegrass and Appalachian, and so when the family was all together, big Catholic family, you know, lots of
Yep.
lots of extended family members. When we'd get together, it'd just be music for hours and hours, and so it was just normal. Also singing in church and all these kind of things. But yeah, I have very early memories of sort of like pulling on the dress of my mum to like ask her for something while she was like singing a solo in her Cajun band, you know, this kind of thing. Or like, because this was back before the smoking ban, like hating the gigs as a child because it was so smoky and all of the venues were. And crazy to think that that was like normal back then.
Yeah,
like, little kid is allowed in a smoky bar. But anyway, my mum did a really good job as a mother. Don't worry, nobody go and complain. Yeah. So that kind of was a whole variety of music that I was exposed to as a young child. When I actually started learning, I had classical piano lessons. And then my grandfather, who played the accordion, Bernard, he sat me down and like showed me how to use an accordion. And then I think it was like a couple of hours of like me learning where the buttons were. And then I was in the band, you know. Yeah. So from that point onwards, I was in the local village band, and I'd play for the village festivals, the feasts that we have. We have these feast days in Cornwall. So I would play for Midsummer, for instance, in our up and down the street. And so that's my kind of musical upbringing. Then it kind of took going on to your other question of how did I get into Scandinavian and Nordic music. Much later, after I had been a little sort of tenacious Irish trad kid, because obviously at some point I wanted to play all the fast stuff. So I discovered Irish music and played really fast for a few years while my testosterone levels were still quite high. Then I passed on from that and sort of discovered I remember there was a Swedish band touring with a storyteller. It was Leif Otterson and Bridget Marsden. And they were touring with a storyteller around the UK, and they had a show called The Devil's Teapot, was it? Yeah, I think so. But the music was just sublime. It was inspired by, you know, Bridget Marsden plays a lot of music from Bingsjö, which is a village in Dalarna. And then Leif has his own tradition as well. And I kind of just fell in love with their music, and again, accordion and fiddle. And from that point onwards, I just went deeper and deeper, and eventually ended up applying to come and study over here.
Oh, that is so cool. I especially love how you see it go from the Irish to the Scandinavian, because that happens a lot here in the States too. Where Irish music is a lot of people's gateway drug to traditional fiddling. Except for in Appalachia, a lot of people, their gateway drug is just the fiddling in Appalachia. But for most of the country, we don't live in those mountains. So we also, for a lot of Americans that get into traditional folk music, you have that same journey of you listen to Irish music because it's the most accessible. And then you sort of branch out from there, or at least you typically do. So it's really interesting to hear that the same thing, happened to you across the pond.
Completely. I mean, I think for me, it goes back to this element of John Dewey said that like learning is a social experience. And so we learn best, most effectively when there is a social meaning for for our journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, like I found Irish sessions where I
Yep.
could go and play music with people of a similar age and a similar like inclination, and it was so much fun. And that was my gateway drug. And then of course then I wanted to learn, and then I wanted to sort of just endlessly play these tunes. And it is true that Irish music is the most, like, often the most accessible, like, around the world. Like, they did a great job with Riverdance, you know. we can say that.
Yeah. Like, dude, all of those Irish bands put in so many marketing hours during the 80s and 90s that it just became like the folk music.
Right, exactly. And I mean, the music's great, so like, of course it's popular, but there's so much, like, obviously, like you said, there's so much beyond that. And I guess for me, as somebody coming from Cornwall, I also started questioning, why am I playing Irish music when also there's great Cornish music, and there's also all this other stuff which I'm so interested in. So at some point, I think it's only natural you start to, like, try to find your own personal connection to the music.
Yeah, so a common theme that I'm seeing between both of you guys is the social and community dimensions to folk music. For both of you, you sort of grew up in the environment and you got used to a music environment where people come together and enjoy it, be they as musicians or as dancers or just there to enjoy the atmosphere. So I definitely see that coming back around when we talk about stuffed pockets. I cannot remember which of you sent me that album. It was, last year, I think. It just ended up in my Instagram inbox, and I listened to it. I loved the color scheme and how just different it was. It was very out there compared to how, normal duos or typical duos that I listen to will usually present themselves. So I picked out a few lines that jumped out at me from your website and the reviews. Expect the unexpected, bring your own mustard. That sounds like an inside joke. But then you also go into these recurring ideas where music is dialogue. And then another phrase that I loved is creative empathy. That shows up when you guys talk about your very different musical backgrounds and how you come together to make music together. So I guess my first question would be, which of those phrases that I just brought up would you guys want to talk about first? Maybe, I guess, when you say expect the unexpected, Ville, if you want to start us off here, when you guys say the unexpected in the context of a traditional folk duo, what are you doing that you think or hope is going to be unexpected?
I think it's like the conversational element of the playing. Like, it's I love the example of, if you throw something up, you expect it to hit the ground or the table at a certain, like, velocity, or what do you say? It's like you feel the pull between the beats, and I think that we're playing with that within conversation all the time. Like, is this the heavy part? Is this the, like, nothing is totally fixed. And I think that's the, like, true north, or like of the group. Like, how do like, if I play a phrase, then Tom must wait for me to be done with it so we can move on together. And there's like the static. I think that our group in many ways is a counterpoint to, like, overproduced, BT, that kind of things, because it has to do with the human element and how we're allowing each other to play all the time. And I think that touches with music is empathy as well. In many ways, it's just like allowing things to have its time in space. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, Tommy, do you want to follow that up?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think like we obviously come from different backgrounds, but so do many bands who form, and you have to, in order to make something together where everybody has some skin in the game, like you need to have that empathy. You need to have, in this case, a special form of creative empathy in order to like meaningfully collaborate. And music has this incredible power, like, to bring people together, and it can be used for evil as well, but in many cases is a force for good. And we, I think, also like to invite our audiences into that process. So we quite enjoy the idea of going into a concert without everything like nailed down.
Yep.
With some big question marks over, okay, well, what is the arrangement of this piece of music? Let's find out as the piece unfolds. And that is the invitation, is that can be inclusive of the audience, whether they're listening or dancing, that we're all in it together, sort of, and that hopefully the audiences can see and participate in those question marks which appear on our faces, like halfway through a gig. And I think initially we sort of started playing like that because we were jamming together and discovering this lovely musical connection that we had. But I think as time went on, it grew into sort of a larger musical philosophy that we both share about how we want to make music.
Awesome. And there's so much there that I love. But before we go further down that path, this question wasn't in the ideas that we had laid out beforehand, but I'm just realizing how much I would actually love to know how you guys actually met and formed your duo, especially because you're bringing up, music brings people together. You guys have these different perspectives. And now I'm sitting here like, I just want to know the story about how you guys actually met and like sort of how the duo formed. Whoever wants to, maybe whoever has the earliest story to share or something like that.
Or
no, you go. I just did a lot of talking.
Okay, yeah. So imagine a bar in a cellar in Vilnius,
Lithuania.
In Vilnius, Lithuania, and it's a crazy like conference for people studying at the different academies around the Nordic countries, and it's called Nortrad. A lot of like super nice groups have formed there. Avestaden were at the same one, and they were sitting around the table, and they were saying like, "Fuck, why do everybody else have bands and not us?" And then they formed Avestaden, and now
check them out.
Yeah,
sounds good.
Yeah, and Floating Sofa was there a few years earlier, and there's so many like great groups just like meeting at places like that. But it was like I saw a person through, a few beers and like got the eyesight, and I knew that all the Finnish people were playing over there, and I just went over and put myself in the Finnish gang and started to play all the Finnish tunes I know. And it was fun because I felt like we were like jumping towards each other, because we heard that both of us were listening in a certain way and like enhancing each other's ideas. And I think that was the first like proper time we met during Nortrad in Lithuania.
Yeah, that was it. That was when we started. Yeah, and then we were still living in different countries at that point. But then Ville came on exchange as a student to Helsinki, where we are now.
Okay.
And Ville was here for a semester,
Yeah.
And then we had a bit more time, and that's when the band began, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was during the pandemic.
It was
as well.
during the pandemic as well. Yeah.
So
we were meeting in groups smaller than 4 people. What was it?
Yep.
Yeah.
I love the scene that Ville set, where it's sort of like, you know, the crowd parts and you guys like lock eyes and you're like, yep, you want to play? No, that's I love that, especially because I was just listening to the Floating Sofa Quartet this morning, when I was driving back. Their new album is great, that they did with Gro Clift and Nesheim. Anyway, no, so my ears perked up when you guys said Floating Sofa Quartet. So did you guys find that when you were first playing together, that this element that Ville is talking about with improv or improvising being a big part of your performance today, did you guys find that was a part of how you guys just organically made music together? Was sort of off the top of your head, just let's see what happens?
Yeah, right from the beginning.
Yeah. You can hear it on Polski News, on Stuffed Pockets. That's the first tune that we properly played together.
Yeah.
And we're like...
And we kept the sort of fluidity even for the album version. We tried to go, okay, let's just not do anything to this. Let's just play it.
Awesome.
So, like, if you go to that track, you can pretty much hear what it sounded like from the start.
Yeah, so it definitely comes through in the album, and that was one of the, you know, attractive elements of it to me, because I get what Ville is talking about, where you can tell when things are very organized, and you know that we need all kinds, right? But it is refreshing, you know, to hear someone that is just willing to let go of control and just see where the music goes. But that is also terrifying in a way, isn't it? Because Ville says you can throw it up and you know it hits the table. Do you know it's going to hit the table? What if it misses the table, you know?
Yeah. I'm not smart like that. So I always think it'll hit the table and there's going to be like this like recoil from it, and it's going to be like you can't like control all the possibilities. You can like control the expected outcome, maybe.
Also, I might add, you need safe people to do this with.
Yeah.
So building that trust with your collaborators and finding those special people with whom you can take those risks.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because, you know, I am a musician myself, and there have been times where, especially in those, you guys will know, especially in those college ensembles, where you better play your part, and if you miss it, you're going to get glared at. You know, I've also had it happen, you know, where I've played with, especially bluegrass groups, where, you know, you try something out, and you sort of know, or you get the feeling of when trying something is a big risk based on just how your bandmates will respond to that. You know, maybe that is too dangerous. And that sort of flexibility is a liability. But then I've also played with people. I will actually say that I play with a Swedish dance group here in Boulder, and they're much older than me. But whenever we take a chance or I try to do something creative on the bass, if it fails, if I flop and fall on my face, they look at me and we all laugh about it, right? So there is like that is so important that you bring that up, is that you do rely on having to be around people that trust you and you trust in to be able to try things on the spot. And knowing that if they don't work, at the very least, you can laugh about it. And it's just part of that positive experience. So if you guys want to say anything more on that, that's great. I just love that whole idea of relying on people still to be comfortable to do that.
Yeah, I think it's about building actual culture and not like representing culture from before. So it's so much the like I do this, and you answer like that, and it becomes like, oh, this is a way of doing things. Because I think that a lot of like listening to bands, and you hear somebody wailing and not knowing why they're wailing, it's real. You're like, oh, where did that come from? Why and how? And but if there's a like an actual exchange of an idea, which moves on in the music, I think that there's so much more to it. So I think that a lot of to gain that kind of trust, you need to be both like quite firm and fixed in what you want to do, and you need to explain it in a way. Like I have so much images in my head and a lot of feelings. I don't. So when I try to explain it, it becomes like super abstract for Tommy at times.
The cross eyes.
Yeah. We've been through this a few times.
How to communicate what's going on inside.
Yeah.
Don't worry, Villa. I relate. Because I the same way, images, and then it comes out of my mouth, and everyone's like, "What the fuck did you just say?"
Yeah. It's an ability.
I love it.
It's a superpower.
It's a superpower. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. But it's also like putting things into the right emotional box in many ways. Like what kind of what's the purpose of this thing? Why are we switching from something that we like into something else? And that kind of conversation, like it's like in the music, it's just happening organically. But when it doesn't happen within the music organically, then you need to put words on it to have a deeper understanding. So I think that there's like many layers where you can actually work on what's our actual like purpose of what we're doing musically.
You actually bring up, so please remind me, I definitely want to get back to that awesome comment you made, Villa, about are you reconstructing something or representing something, or are you trying to bring up something new? I think that's a really cool conversation to have. But you're also getting into this really cool conversation about what the purpose of music theory is, right? Because you talk about communicating ideas. I, especially when I am talking to people in what we can roughly call the Viking music scene, which is usually a bunch of metalheads that picked up a toggle harpa or something like that. In the metal community, you do have this strong anti-stance against music theory. Like, oh, it's just a box it's the man that keeps you down, But then I'm always of the mind that music theory is a way to communicate ideas rather than a way to constrict ideas, though it can be that too. But what you're talking about, we're actually having the ability to communicate one of those pictures in your head. Developing a language that you can use with other musicians to communicate that idea is so important, or else, Tommy's going to sit there cross-eyed like he was just doing, which was hysterical. Tommy, do you want to follow up any of this or add in any based on what Tommy was talking about?
I think exactly. What are the alternatives? I think going back to or echoing some of the stuff we said before, about empathy, you can replace a lot of the theory that you use in the rehearsal room, in our case, I think, with using non-theoretical language, like feelings, textures, colors, sensations, and they're incredibly effective often to communicate actually what is the intention of what you're trying to do. And then if we're both on board with the intention, then we're working together to create that thing, as opposed to dictating, okay, this is the thing we're making and this is how you go and do it. And this is, I'm not alone in this at all. I'm stealing some of these ideas from a lot of the like contemporary scene around free improv, where they're like, no, we don't want to use theory language anymore. Like, I've heard from friends who've gone to Berkeley that they're like, no, we don't talk crescendos anymore, or whatever. Like, we're gonna use blue instead. And that's an exaggeration, but like that is the conversation that's going on, like also in many other places about like, okay, what are the alternatives, and finding interesting ways to build that language of how do we talk about music in a way which is like accessible in some cases to a much wider cross section of people as well.
Yeah, and especially because, you know, I teach music appreciation here, which is like a combination history, but also teaching them how to talk about music as best as I can. And actually, one of the first things that I emphasize to these undergrads is that we almost exclusively talk about music in metaphors. Like when you say a pitch is higher up, even something that basic, it's not really higher up, right? And it's also a pitch isn't literally lower. And then if you look at how you talk about like a double bass, for instance, you say you go higher up on the fretboard. Where's my hand? There it is. You're actually going lower on the fretboard. But someone says go higher up on the fretboard and you're bringing your hand down. Like these are very basic ideas that like emphasize the fact that almost every way that we talk about music is metaphor. And theory in a lot of ways is trying to reduce the metaphor, but I also love the conversation you guys are having here about like, no, what if we really leaned into the fact that it's just all metaphors? You know, that there could be a lot of cool stuff that happens there. Great. No, this is an awesome chat. I love this. So I want to go down deeper into that spectrum that Ville brought up between, you know, when you are playing folk music, you have a spectrum between hardcore traditionalist and the more progressive or alternative or contemporary side of folk music, where you're still using the tradition as the basis, but you get a little bit more daring. And you can more freely try out musical ideas that wouldn't be so welcome in the traditional side. Like for instance, I know that whenever I try to add a 3-chord to something in the Swedish dance group that plays here, I get a look like that chord doesn't go there. I'm like, it sounds nice. And they're on the more traditional side of it, right? So where do you guys think that I feel like I know the answer to this, but where do you think that as a duo, if you either land in one place on that spectrum, or if you sort of maybe open it up but to be a little bit more flexible of an answer as opposed to assuming you're in one spot, where do you guys sort of take influence from? And where do you think which parts of your duo land on which sides of the spectrum? I guess a more simple way to ask this is between the very traditional and the contemporary progressive folk side of things. How do you think those things blend in your music?
Can I start?
Sure.
Yeah,
Please.
I tradition, how I perceive it, is it's like people being showered by a vortex that they decide on being in. So it's like, now I'm in the folk space. I get showered by the folk space, and then I decide to step out of it. So some of this folk space stays within me, and it's brought elsewhere because there's other things that are beautiful and are fantastic in our world, which you can like get as much of as you like, basically. But I think that like with this showering of things, it's also the like harsh values, and I think like there's tradition in itself isn't harmful, but it's like the compression of to the true thing, because we're like looking for answers in something where there is not one answer, but there's an answer for everyone who's been like shown or like been showered by the vortex in a sense. So I think that there's like there's as many answers as there are people into like traditional things, and I think that stands which probably on beyond the like more the hippie end of the scale. Or, yeah.
I should just call it the hippie end of the scale.
Yeah.
I like that. I should just call it that.
Yeah. And I'm comfortable over there. So
Yep.
yeah,
Me too.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So Tommy, do you want to add, follow up with anything?
I find this a difficult question.
Yeah.
To be honest, I like tradition and modernity and all these kind of things. Like, it's a good question. Don't get me wrong. I have problems with sort of like the tradition is very constructed. Okay, putting a little ethnomusicology hat on that.
I was about to grab it for you.
Yeah, there you go. You're gonna okay. Some lovely little cases in point, like what is it? The nickel harp that is now UNESCO protected.
Yeah.
But it's kind of built around a tradition, which is like, if we're talking about the modern nickel harpa, is like almost within living memory that it was sort of invented. So, and yet it's seen as this like hyper Swedish thing. Now, like ancient even, and then it pops up, like the modern nickel harpa pops up in like TV shows depicting life from hundreds of years ago, and this is just one little example, and this is happening constantly. We're sort of like ascribing something ancient to something which is actually constantly being sort of invented from day to day. And so, like, I find it hard to put us on that spectrum where the goalposts for me are very sort of the ends of this spectrum that we're making for ourselves are very sort of woolly to start with for me. So, I mean, I think like the little sort of island of solace for all of this confusion for us is that I think we make music for ourselves and for our own enjoyment, and that there's also a kind of a community of people, I feel, who feel the same and are excited about taking inspiration from these melodies, and also this way of making music, which is very sort of community based, often with a strong connection to place, and I also the connection with dance, which we're taking. Well, we haven't talked about that much yet, but that's a big part of the way that we like to make music, which is thinking about the connection between music and dance, playing for dancers, being dancers ourselves, and that's very much connected to sort of the folk music that we've ended up playing, which is most of the tunes that we play will have like either been traditional and had an intended dance for them from the start, or we're writing new music with these dances in mind, which is something very sort of intrinsic to a lot of the folk music that we're taking inspiration from.
Awesome.
One unpopular opinion is like that one of my arguments that the most traditional thing we got is väsen, because that's the thing that's the most recreated right now, like with folk music style wise, and like Roger Tallroth is an own genre of itself on guitar, and like I think that there's many ways of thinking of it, which makes that a fun statement, but it's also a bit like it secludes everybody else from the folk world. So there's one way of doing folk music again, which is reproduced by everybody just hearing väsen in the 90s and going.
Which is to say that we're constantly creating sort of like these orthodoxies as the tradition develops. That said, I love Versen, and I love how Roger combines like Brazilian rhythms in Swedish folk music. Yeah. It's fantastic, and it really works. And they created a tradition in a way. And there's also nothing wrong with that. But as long as we kind of can recognize that and also celebrate and the diversity that also exists.
Yeah.
I love that you guys are bringing up something very similar again that happens in that, again, no great name for it, but the Viking music stuff, where they have the same issue where Vardruna invented a whole new style of music. Or if I know Einar might not want me to say it that way, but effectively for a lot of people, he created a whole new way of making music. There was a way that medieval music was made before Vardruna, and now it's made entirely different after Vardruna. And so we have that same dynamic where you can always tell when someone just heard Vardruna and now wants to just make Vardruna music. And I have noticed that same thing from a distance, happening in the folk music scene. But this is my first time I'm hearing that confirmed from folk musicians, where I always hear so much Vesen in so many of the groups that come out. And, you know, this is also coming from someone who Vesen was one of my gateway drugs for Swedish folk music and even general Scandinavian folk. Them, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with Draupner. They're a trio. Draupner and Vesen were the two first any kind of Scandinavian folk bands that I listened to. So for me, having Vesen be my first I wasn't even able to identify that was specifically a Vesen sound. Because to me, Vesen was just what Swedish folk music sounds like. And it wasn't until many years later when I have the ways to get into other kinds of folk music where I'm like, oh no, there's a Vesen sound. And it is so interesting how in these unrelated music scenes, but it'll also happen, this happens all the time, where someone kicks the door down and then everyone wants to sound like the person who kicked the door down. And that's just how music develops, right? Like how many bands were just accused of being a Led Zeppelin ripoff in the 70s? You know, even AC/DC was just accused of being just like Led Zeppelin ripoff. But nowadays, all these decades later, no one thinks of them that way anymore, unless you're really deep in that music scene. But no, that is so cool that you guys bring that up, that Vesen continues to all these decades later be this defining force stylistically in Swedish folk music. If any of you guys want to pick that up and say more, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah,
I would have something. Well, which is to say that this is nothing new. This has been happening for centuries and millennia, and like there's the richness of all of the Swedish Finnish sort of minority that Ville comes from, where you undoubtedly had these fiddlers going backwards and forwards between Finland and Sweden and bringing tunes with them, and everybody was like, hell yeah, we're gonna play this tune. And then it made its own like rich tradition. There's another great example, I'll just mention it, it's a quick one, from my town or my local area in the west of Cornwall, where we have this reel called the Newlyn Reel, from a town called Newlyn, and it's quite obviously like a Russian like party tune.
Yeah.
It's like da 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 da. It's this kind of thing, and the dance which goes with it is incredibly Jewish. And so, like, obviously, it's a port. At some point, somebody came through with an instrument playing this tune, and all of the locals went, "That's cool," and we're going to play that now. So this like Russian Jewish tune has entered the Cornish tradition. And this process is going on like everywhere in the world. And which is to say, like, we always benefit from this fluidity of humanity. I believe there's nothing, you know, there's nothing new about human movement, and also we should celebrate the exchange of ideas and the movement of people around that.
Yeah, and I think that in continuation from what you just said, it's like if we go back to the vortexes, it's like having a gas station you go to and you fill yourself up to the brim, how much you can take, and then you go and try to use that fuel through like your V8 system or whatnot, and then you decide to go to the same pump again. But then you see something else in your life, which is also like super beautiful, and then like in everything in your human being wants to be there and do the same kind of thing, and then you do it. I think that's just such human behavior. Like you go to the same spring for water, you go to the pump for gas, and you go for like. I think it's such a and I think that's also more traditional in a way than writing something down and playing it as it's written, because then you actually lived it and consumed it and changed it into the most beautiful thing you could produce in a way.
That is a pretty powerful statement, right? That it's in a lot of ways more traditional to just do what you feel than it is to just copy something verbatim from a piece of paper that was written down by Anders Zorn. You know what I mean? Like there are so many. I just love that you've brought that up, because that's a conversation that comes up for me all the time. Is you know, I also am a little hesitant. Americans, when they are doing traditional stuff, they by nature get very defensive over changes, because there's the dynamic with American traditional musicians that because the tradition was transplanted, there's a lot more pressure to protect it. So Americans get very protective of whatever traditional culture that they are participating in, for better or for worse. And I also have, you know, that conversation quite often where you reach a point where trying so hard to keep it from changing is in a lot of ways not very traditional, because these musicians that we are emulating or that we are trying to keep alive through the music, I can't imagine, you know, Møllerguten, you know, on the Norwegian side saying, no, I'm not going to try that. It's, you know, that's not traditional, you know, especially because, you know, then Alle Bull, who played with him, was just a fucking maniac and would try everything new under the sun. I just love what you brought up there, that tradition doesn't inherently mean unflexible or unchanging or solid, because people are not unchanging. You know what I mean? If any of you guys want to say more on that, I think that's just a really cool, you know, thing to keep in mind when we are talking about folk music today.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. I think like that quality is important as a creative, regardless of which like tradition you find yourself in. We're all navigating traditions, even contemporary postmodern artists, you know. Yep. But like I think in the case of folk music, it's sort of it's a political point as well, because we've got to counter the narrative around folk music being often a token of like nationalism or like of identity, like in quite like pigeonholed ways. And so it's important for this conversation to be extra sharp in that way to counter that narrative.
Yeah, I don't know if Tommy, I actually don't know if we are friends on Facebook, but Ville, you might have seen that I just had an interview with the director for Trollstemt, that the Norwegian documentary on, you know, the history of fiddling, but from the way that he went about it was countering the narrative of Norwegian fiddling that is carting an old man out to a farm that he's never been to and having him play for a documentary, and then it establishes this very Lutheran and very 19th century idea of what Norway is. And that narrative is directly in a lot of ways erases the history of fiddling in Norway that was actually vilified by the church, So the very same system that's holding up fiddling as the true Norwegian soul was just 100 years earlier burning fiddles. And so that is the counter narrative that Frederick, the director of this documentary, wanted to tell, was the side of Norwegian fiddling that actually antagonizes the idea that it's this nice, proper, nice old man in a farm playing music tradition. And I think we're at a point now where people are being a little bit more receptive of those alternate narratives and the good that they can do.
Yeah, because ultimately we just want to take in the whole human. Like we're up there on stage, we're playing music, and we're not just tokens of this tradition that we're taking inspiration from. We are complete people with
living
our own stories and our own beliefs. And we're not going to go up there like half sort of disguising what we are. I mean, this goes back to maybe what you said about like finding it fun and interesting, the way that we were presenting music with the album cover, which is incredibly colorful. And this is also to say that like folk music has, or in addition to being used as something quite nationalistic, has also sort of been perceived in some situations as being a very masculine space, and a very sort of people of a particular sort of heritage perhaps as well. And there's many other sort of assumptions which have kind of been made about who has the right to this music in a way. And that's not to say, like, I'm also incredibly like aware that I'm a Cornish man in Finland, like playing often like Finnish and Swedish music, and so there's a very interesting conversation for me to have sometimes of like should I be playing this music? Like, am I appropriating Swedish culture? Am I appropriating Finnish culture? And so this is like something we need to be very careful around and very delicate, because there's I would hate to sort of obscure or appropriate somebody else's culture in that way. But that's why you often see me in duos or in bands playing this kind of music, because it's very important to have that personal connection and that reason to be playing some of the more culturally charged stuff that you end up playing. But at the same time, back to what I said before, trying to communicate this message that at least I think from our perspective, a lot of this music belongs to everyone, and so that includes sort of minority genders and people of all ethnic backgrounds, and so and that is a very exciting place to be, and we're very lucky also to find ourselves in communities here in the Nordic countries and in the UK. I would say I don't have much knowledge of the US, where there's an increasingly sort of pluralistic like scene for this kind of music, where like there's a really diverse group of people who are both playing and dancing and enjoying this music. So that's really exciting.
Yeah. And I think the inclusiveness comes when there's like trust for that the people you meet will respect your space. And that's such an important topic as well. Like, if we're teaching things, then we need to teach people also like to respect each other's space, and like they can contribute to create other safe spaces for people, because it's like when dancing, you know, the like greatest sign of trust is the forehead against forehead.
Yep.
And both closing your eyes. And it sounds dangerous, and it can be, but it's also it's such a treat when both, like, in the end of the dance, we're like, yeah, it was so nice. I was just totally relying on you, and I had my eyes closed, and the other one is like, oh! I had my eyes closed all the time as well.
Yeah, we both had our eyes closed. Driving blind, you know?
Oh, that's great. So there are just two more conversations I want to go down, and I think
we're running close to time for us.
So sure. Okay. So I guess I'll have it up to you guys then, because I either want to go down you guys talk about dance, because you've been we could just continue that and go down deeper, or have that conversation where, what does it mean for you to be a folk musician today? But if you guys are running low on time, that one risks pushing us pretty deep into.
Yeah, but I think that we could like compress it into one question, in a way, because I think that everybody's like, because in the Nordic style of doing things, then you usually you only got the top register, so everybody in the room becomes one entity. So you're basically playing the room, and you're dancing the room when somebody's playing, when dancing. So I think that it's such a tightly fused together system of beautiful people sweating and having fun. That makes like the whole scene, and like all beings within it are like they're there to like discover their space with other people, in a sense. And I think that, like, from a dancing point of view, it's just like the less things you do, the less aware you are about yourself, the more you're in what you're doing. So every step matters, every breath in the right place, and like with the same intensity as the music, it matters. And then you can go back to be like, oh shit, I'm a bit sweaty now after this one dance. Is it okay to dance one more? Yeah. And then you go back to the space again. You go into that like, okay, but now I've gotten the permission to be myself within one way of doing a thing. So for me, it's just like it's above all the things that I feel from my thinking brain. It's like the ambrosia of life.
It's a break. It's a break from thinking in a lot of ways. You let go of control over your thinking brain, and that kind of escape from yourself can be pretty good. But it's like escaping from only one side of yourself, the side that's usually in control all day, is that thinking rational brain. And when you're dancing or when you're playing music, you let go of that side to go into purely feeling brain. I really love that you bring that up. Yeah, Tommy, you have something you want to say for it?
Yeah, well, what you said is, I think there's that little sweet spot, isn't there? And like you mentioned it maybe earlier, but like the flow state, like it's a space you go into where your thinking changes, where you're still thinking, but you're challenged in just the right amount that it takes the entirety of you, and you enter this space where the balance of the challenge and the reward and your own competence, like, is all in perfect harmony, and
Yeah.
you just flow. And so maybe this goes back to your other question of what does it mean to be a folk musician today. In a way, like, existence is very confusing right now. Like, the world is pretty messed up.
I understand. I live in the States.
Yeah.
It's been a weird month, man.
I didn't ask, but, you know, my condolences. But, you know, like, when you're in the moment making music, everything is very simple and very rewarding, and we live for that. So
Beautiful.
like, that is maybe goes some way to answering your question.
No, definitely. At least it's a great start, because, you know, I can assume that some people are listening to the conversations we're having about the ways folk music has been used, and the thorny issues around it. And some people might be thinking, then why do you do it? And so I think that question actually starts to answer it. Because, like, why do you do folk music almost seemingly in spite of all of these little issues surrounding it? But I really don't want to keep you guys any longer if you're running into time. So I guess this would be a great way to I guess, you know, hit the pause button or whatever.
Exactly, and then we meet up again sometime when we continue it.
Oh, you guys are coming back. You know you are. So for those listening who may not be familiar with you guys, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you? What sort of promotional, I guess, spiel do you guys have?
All the usuals, you know, obviously, like, a number one, head to the Bandcamp, because with Bandcamp, a huge portion, compared to all of the other options out there, a huge portion of the money goes to the artist directly. But then you can also find us on socials and all of the streaming sites. Check out some of our videos. We've got a great music video with us dancing from the first album called Tribute. And then keep your eyes peeled for album number 2, which is currently hasn't got a date set on it, but is very much work in progress. And we just did a preview concert of the material last night here in Helsinki to a bunch of close friends and dancers. Very exciting stuff.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And Ville, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I had only silly things to say. So let's leave it at that.
He's got a solo album coming, so, you know. We should remember to plug that too.
Oh yeah.
But those are just silly things, Tommy.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, check out Ville Tommie. It's got what's the album called? Fiddling On.
I love it. And also, I was going to point out that I spent all that time making sure that I pronounced Ville's last name right, and that I never said it. And so you just hijacked my glory. I was going to say Ville Tommie. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for your time. I really, really loved this conversation. I think you guys started a lot of really cool things that people will have to think about. And when album number 2 comes along, I would love to have you guys back on. Just hang out after I end the recording. But otherwise, you guys take care. All right.
Super. Yeah. Super. Catch you around.